Okay, I got my Zoom up. We are at noon, and it looks like we are streaming online. So, welcome everybody to the next panel in our fantastic lineup here at Viz Vogue or Visionary Current Challenges and Future Opportunities in Situated Visualizations. I'm Michelle Borkin, and I'm co organizer and co chair for this panel with Melanie Torrey, and we're both at Northeastern University. So before we dive into things, we want to make sure that everyone sort of is on the same page. And a lot of people might be new here to learn about situated visualization. So what are situated visualizations? They are the visual data representations that are deeply integrated with spaces, objects, and activities in a physical environment. So illustrated here are non-situated visualizations, right? This looks like me participating in Viz this year. I'm on my phone, I might be checking some sports scores, I'm on the computer doing some analysis. That doesn't matter where I'm doing it. I can do it from anywhere. Situated visualizations, right, are cases where you're in a certain environment, you have certain objects or people with you. You're going to be using different technology potentially to take those visualizations with you, be it a smartphone or a tablet. We're talking augmented reality, immersive and overlaid environments, and situated visualizations, as you'll hear from the incredible lineup of panelists we have, are happening in all sorts of different locations, and there's great potential for the future. So everything from IoT and appliances and smart homes to education, healthcare, wayfinding and navigation is huge, manufacturing, industry, science, and critically, public safety and search and rescue are all cases where situated visualization currently is being used and is developing rapidly. Now, how did I fall into being really passionate about situated viz? I come from the technology angle. So I care deeply about mobile visualization and how you design visualizations on different size displays, which are critical for situated viz, as well as my more recent interest in augmented reality and using some of these new technologies available to us. And not even very new, some of it older, but taking advantage of this for putting data viz in a specific place at a specific time. So now I'll let Melanie introduce herself.
Hey, everybody. Nice to see you all here. I'm Melanie Torrey, co-organizer of the panel. And situated visualization is a relatively new area for me. Many of you might not think of me working in this area because I haven't published much in it. But since joining the Rue Institute a few years ago, I've become very interested in how we can work with real world environments where there is data that needs to be used in the context of this work, and especially around data monitoring. And in particular, I've been thinking about manufacturing settings where we might be monitoring the status of a production line or the status of equipment, and healthcare settings where we might be monitoring the status of patients and making sure that we can intervene in the case of problems. You can go to the next slide. So in this panel, Michelle and I wanted to get together a group of experts and talk about this relatively new area that's emerging around situated visualization and see what the experts had to say about a number of different questions. So some things that we were thinking about in organizing the panel are, is situated viz in vogue and it's going to go away, or is it a visionary look at the future? How can we design for it? These are unique situations in which there's stuff going on in the physical world as well as the information that people need to attend to. It might be challenging for people to do context switching in those scenarios between their physical work and their data work. There are also legacy systems in these environments. How do we integrate with those? And how can we avoid endangering users, right? If there's dangerous things going on in the physical environment and they're attending to their data display, things could go wrong. Also, how can we kind of encourage adoption of these new technologies in these environments that may have fairly old school tech? And is this all a fad? Especially the AR part, is it a fad or is it the future? You can go to the next one. So we brought together a fabulous group of panelists. I'm not going to introduce them here. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves in their statement. But I am really, really excited to hear what they have to offer around the topic of situated visualization and many of these questions that we've posed. So before we jump into the panel statements, a brief agenda, we're going to spend the next half hour-ish on the position statement presentations from each of the panelists, and then the rest will be Q&A, and that'll be driven from Slido. So please go ahead and go to Slido now and start entering your questions even during the panel statements so that we'll have a bunch of those ready to go as soon as we jump into the Q&A portion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, and that's Natalie Bressa.
Yes, thank you. I'll share my screen. Does that work?
Yes, looking good.
Okay. So, I'm Nathalie Bressa. I'm an assistant professor at Télécom Paris and Institut Polytechnique de Paris. And thank you for having me on this panel today. So in my talk, I want to put forward the argument that we are not yet fully mobilizing the concept of situatedness and what it can offer to to information visualization. So first, let's take a look at current research on situated visualization. There has been a focus on AR technology. For some researchers, situated visualization might even be synonymous with augmented reality. So I have never worked with AR, but somehow I still did my PhD on situated visualization, which proved to be often a bit confusing because people would say, so you do AR visualization. Well, not quite. While there are also field studies, co-design, or other qualitative research methods, there is a prominence of lab studies as the most common way to study situated visualization. So what are the consequences of this? There's a close relationship between situated visualization and AR, which has influenced the field and emphasizes technical contributions. And this leads to a prevailing spatial notion of situatedness that emphasizes spatial properties and relationships between visualizations, objects, and locations. So these points I just mentioned, I did not just make that up. It was one of the main findings on the survey I did on situated visualization during my PhD. So why might this be limiting? AR technology is an obvious fit for situated visualization, but it is not the only one. Displays, physicalization, or even low-tech approaches are all feasible technologies for situated visualization. And while novel technology, in this case AR, can enable novel use cases, it should, however, also not foreclose the use of alternative, sometimes more appropriate technologies. And work on situated visualization could benefit from engaging in deeper discussions on technological choices related to the case or target domain without defaulting to one technology or another. And while lab studies can be used to gain an understanding of how people interact with and perceive situated visualizations in a controlled setting and to evaluate prototypes, to design and account for situatedness in all its richness, I believe it is essential to also engage with the context and the audience the visualization is intended for. The visualizations are supposed to be situated after all. And lastly, starting with spatial properties, location, and spatial organization isn't necessarily wrong. It's a common research strategy. Start with what's measurable and operationalizable. But there's more to situatedness than space. And by not considering the various ways in which visualizations can be situated, whether socially, culturally, or historically, we're potentially missing out on research opportunities. So to take a step back, why do we do situated visualization? So for me personally, the real potential of situated visualization lies in integrating visualizations into people's actual environments, considering their lived experiences in meaningful ways. For example, situated visualization can empower communities to collect and visualize data about themselves, providing a way for people to contextualize data that is relevant to them. So I argue for prioritizing social and material circumstances while incorporating a broader understanding of situatedness. So one approach I have put forward in the past is to shift thinking from about situated visualization to how to situate visualizations. So how can we make situatedness the focus point of design? So in line with this trend of thinking in the past, I have introduced these perspectives of situatedness: space, place, time, activity, and community, to approach situated visualization from different angles, where each perspective foregrounds different aspects of situatedness. But this is just one possibility. We can think of even more perspectives or even different framings of situated visualization. So this year's Viz is actually a good chance to do some rethinking on situated visualization. So the capstone this year is by Catherine D'Ignacio and on visualizing inequality. And one of the best paper awards is about entanglement theory and feminist epistemologies for visualization. So this strand of research on feminist visualization actually uses the term situated and situatedness quite a lot, in the sense of situated knowledge as a main pillar of feminist epistemology that sees data and visualizations as inseparable from the context and the conditions under which they were created. So this means using situated in situated visualization as a point of questioning and critique. So we also have to critically question why situatedness matters, to what end, and whether it is even desirable at all. Do we want a future where we have constant data and visualizations around us all the time? Who produces the data and the visualizations, and for what purpose? So situated visualization as a critical thinking tool might help us answer those questions and put the situated back into situated visualization. And yeah, this is where I will leave you for now.
All right, thank you very much. So next up is Nicholas.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, hopefully you see this. All right, so I'm Nicholas Almquist. I'm a professor at Aarhus University in Denmark, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. This is the second panel of the day for me, so I've become a professional opinion haver. In this case, situated visualization is close to the research I'm doing. And for context, I am director of a research center here at Aarhus that I founded about a year ago on situated visualization, situated analytics, ubiquitous analytics for data visualization in the real world, anytime, anywhere. And the center and the work I do is based on this idea that, yeah, data is collected everywhere and accordingly should be able to be analyzed anywhere. And I even wrote a paper on this in the communications of the ACM that reviewed my work for the last 10, 12 years on this topic that was published last year. So this is definitely an area that's very interesting and relevant to what I do. And I think this whole idea of situated analytics has a lot of exciting potential. This work, we'll hear from Wes a little later in this panel, but I think is a great example of some very elegant and compelling examples of how you can situate representations of data, even embedded in your physical world, to support all kinds of exciting tasks. And we're also reaching a point where the hardware is increasingly here. I mean, the Apple Vision Pro is one example, the Meta Quest 3, and even the Orion we see Zuck here wearing, are now tearing down a lot of those barriers that used to be against adoption of situated analytics, situated visualization, all these technologies. But even if we're kind of at the cusp of this kind of adoption, I still think, after having worked in this field for more than a decade, that we don't really have a killer app. And of course, you know, this is a panel statement, so I want to be a little provocative, but I still feel that situated analytics is very compelling, very interesting, but it represents a very small type of application. This example is from one of my NSF grants on something called Data World, where I was kind of struggling to come up with this killer app, and I'm not sure I actually succeeded, but it's an example of what I'm talking about. You know, how do we, what are we actually designing for? Is it someone who's running towards a bus station and they see the bus table and they know whether to run or they can walk? You know, it becomes a little far-fetched. And so my claim here, my provocative statement, is that even if it's a very compelling, interesting example, the situation where this actually will be useful, embedding data in the real world, is vanishingly small. And most of the tasks can actually be done using general data analytics tools where we use other platforms. We might use mobile devices. We might use general desktop computers. We don't really need this situation of putting data into the world, even embedding the data on top of things, even if it's very compelling. This example from a recent paper of mine, there's a link here as well if you want to see it, is a TVCG survey, goes to sort of discuss and taxonomize different disciplines of visualization and analytics. And if you look at it, you see that what situated visualization is and situated analytics is, it's actually a fairly small subset. So it's not too surprising that the tip of the iceberg where you can actually use situated analytics as a killer app is very small. But I think in general, it's worth just taking a step back and stop thinking about, and I see this a lot, I stopped thinking about immersive analytics, situated visualization, and so on, as a kind of a horse race, where 3D is now the tool that we want to push, and we want to show in every conceivable way that it's superior or at least equal to traditional 2D tools. I don't think that's what we should be doing. We should be picking the right tool for the job. We don't have to pick a winning horse and then put everything on that horse. So if I was going to paraphrase Richard Hamming, who was one of the first presidents of the ACM, and he wrote a book on scientific computing where he talked about the purpose of computing being insight, not numbers. I would say that the purpose of analytics is insight, not platforms. We should be picking the right platform. We don't have to push situated analytics for every single thing. There might be some very compelling cases where it's helpful, but in many others, perhaps the majority of them, we can make do with other tools. If you're interested in more of my thoughts, I wrote a little blog post on this, and I look forward to hearing what my fellow panelists have to say. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicholas. So next up, we have Petra Eisenberg.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Petra Eisenberg, and I'm a senior research scientist at INRIA in France. And I'm going to take a technological viewpoint today, although I have a bunch of stuff to say to the stuff that was already said. But yeah, the first thing, as a disclaimer, as you saw from Natalie's and Niklas's statement, is that I, for myself, have answered this question: does situated visualization mean augmented reality? Because for a lot of, if you look at the literature, and this is what their surveys show also, is often the case, right? For me, it's not. Because to me, anything like this, where you have visualizations and meaningful data reference that they point to and that reinforce each other, is a situated and or embedded visualization. And you can find these in many places in terms of physical displays. And this is what I want to focus on today. So in your home, you will have displays that will give you contextual information to a task or an activity that you're currently engaging in. You see this sometimes, embedded on floors, projected onto floors. This was from the Paris Olympics. Another one from the Paris Olympics, where they give contextual information about long jump, for example. This is one I took in a hardware store in France, where they put additional information about customer ratings for this sad product here, and energy ratings, etc. What I want to talk about is specifically, if we think about situated visualizations as being an interesting application, maybe a killer app, we can discuss that, for novel displays, physical displays, then are we thinking ahead enough to actually shape how these visualizations might be used on technology that is just about to come out, or that might come out in the future? And this whole discussion reminds me of what happened with smartwatches. So those of you who have a smartwatch, this is a very canonical picture. If we look at what other smartwatches look like, many of them look like the physical watches we used to have, right? There's a little bit of stuff on them that wasn't possible, but more or less they look like them. But if you ask people what they would want to see on their smartwatch, and you ask them what are the in-context information needs that they have and that the smartwatch could serve to them, you will get a whole bunch of super creative, completely differently looking ideas that you can try out, implement, and where you can actually make an impact on how this technology might be used. And this is interesting because there's a whole bunch of technology that will come out, like bendable displays, right? We're already seeing these foldable smartphones. This is a really cool project that took this idea of these large spherical displays and made them handheld, sort of in mimicking this really large Las Vegas sphere here, and seeing, what can we do if we can carry information on a display around in our hand or share it with other people. There's a cube that you can now buy that has displays on all sides. But what's interesting in many of these new display examples, and this reminds me of the old times when large displays and tabletop displays came out, it's often these toy examples, right? This cube is marketed with a lot of games as an example. The other one had a big smiley face on it, right? Is that really what we want to do? Or is this showing the full potential of what we can do with these displays? And I think situated visualizations will make this technology useful, but it takes a lot of work to figure out what we should show on them, right? Working with new technology, especially if it's not completely out there yet, is very, very challenging. We need to find out what people want to see, how they want to see it, where and when they want to see it. And we need to build enabling technologies sometimes because it's just not there yet for us to try out, or we need to find ways on how to build situated viz prototypes. And one of the things I would really like the viz community to help figure out is how we can actually build for this future in which situated visualizations might be everywhere and anywhere, right? And where we might be using them in our daily lives. And I think a big positive push towards creating momentum for doing so would be to start publishing visions. We don't have a good venue at all for doing this. A company that does this regularly is Microsoft. So here are two pictures from one of their recent Visions of the Future videos. So the left part is a video, is a snippet of this video where there's a diver swimming, and this diver gets situated information about the types of plants they're swimming by. And on the right is a visualization about the performance of a knee implant a person had. And there's a conversation with his daughter happening about that. And this kind of stuff I would love to see more of in the research community, just spark people's interest and give research momentum. So I think we need to look at novel displays right now, especially those kinds of displays that are not yet out there, if we want to make this pervasive and mobile data exploration happen. And that's it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Petra. Our next presenter is Michael Settlemeyer.
Okay, here we go. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Michael Settlemeyer. I'm a professor for visualization and virtual augmented reality here at the University of Stuttgart. So my talk is going to be about, or my introduction, AR displays as a new medium for visualization. And I'm pretty impressed by Michelle and Melanie because I think we now actually get some like orthogonal positions. I was a bit afraid that Petra, when she said I will talk about a technology perspective, that she actually will talk about technology. I think I took that a little bit more serious, and I will take a different angle and also made my slides less beautiful than all the people that spoke so far. Okay, so what is my position? First, I think augmented reality is a fundamental enabling technology for situated visualization. And by the way, I mean real augmented reality where we do registered stuff in 3D. So if we as visualization want to be a driver in situated visualization research, I think we need to embrace in technical papers. We need to build these systems. I think we're not doing that at the moment. Okay, so let me make my point here. So what's the problem? I think at the moment there is definitely some visualization people that also work in augmented reality. But when we submit our papers to IEEE Viz, usually they are rejected. And I think that's because of overly high expectations of what AR can do. So the technical AR situated visualization work at the moment happens, I think, mostly in other places. So at ISMAR, at VR, at VRST, at WIST, at CHI even, they're much more open to that sort of work. And so at Viz, that's my impression. We go get like, theory papers, speculative studies, elicitation studies, Wizard of Oz, even visions. I just added that for you, Petra. We get these sort of papers. I'm not saying they're bad, but like my point is, if we want to be part of this movement, we need to build these systems and we need to do the real thing. Okay? So what are potential reasons for this problem? So I thought a little bit about that. And I think the main point of my talk is I think the Viz community has this tendency, again, I will come to that point later, to view augmented reality as a competition to desktop. So I think, Nicholas, you also said there's no killer app, yeah? And like, there's a race between 2D and 3D. I disagree. I think like I see augmented reality as a potential new medium. So think of an augmented reality device that you can wear like glasses. I know we're not there yet, but there's a whole lot of push in this area. Then we can get rid of all of this, but we don't know whether it will happen, right? But like, if we don't look at AR as a medium where like, people just will use augmented reality displays through visualizations, we will miss that train. The same happened with cell phones some 15 years ago. Okay, so the other problem is we're overestimating maturity, as most of the people do in the out there who are not working on AR. AR is hard from a technical perspective to build, and it will look not as nice as visualizations that we do on desktops and that we have optimized for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Okay, so let's come back to IEEE Viz. So what is an easy recipe to get a Viz paper accepted? You all know that. First, you want to have an interesting problem that already exists right now, right here. And it's ideally like, a killer app. Next one is you want to have some large complex data with like, some analytical interest for a human being. And it needs to be pretty, okay? Sorry to say that, but like if your visualization is not pretty, it's not gonna be accepted. Okay, so you need to be good in all three of these. And now let's look at some situated visualization examples, mostly from our group here. So we built this guitar hero, which essentially puts like, I love playing the guitar, and like it can show you like how to play certain chords on your guitar in situ with this guitar. So let's look. The task, I think, is fantastic. Okay, I'm biased, but like it's great. Data, okay, there's not really a whole lot of data of interest to the human. Is it pretty? Well, it's in AR. It has the messy real world around it. So you always need to deal with that. That's something you don't need to deal with that on your desktop. Okay, next example. So here's we wanted to push like more on the analytical and the data task. So we had this scenario where we built something where like, you would play the role of an exhibitor, and then you create this museum with like, data-driven exhibits, and then you use that to optimize what you're doing. So I think in data, we really like, got good, but the task is sort of like, we made it up because we needed to think about potential things that could happen in the future. Is it pretty? I don't think so. And like, of course, it was also rejected from IEEE Viz, so we published it somewhere else. Can there also be pretty work in AR? And I think yes. So this is a work of our new colleague Dieter Schmalstieg here. So on the left, you see this is like, augmented reality of spray paint, which looks pretty photorealistic, I think. And on the right-hand side, you see like X-ray vision or diminished reality, where you can look underground with like, photorealistic information. So this is pretty, I would say. There's actually a lot of data behind it, but not the sort of data we're interested in this. And the task is, I think it's there, but it's definitely speculative about the potential tasks that people will do in the future. So My perspective is, and people here on the panel, they know this paper. So Wes and Petra wrote this paper on the vision. It seems to me that people are interested in this sort of thing. Like, you know, we want to have X-ray visualizations. Wouldn't it be great to have it? So, but if you send something like an X-ray visualization paper to Wes, it's gonna be rejected at the moment. And I think that's a problem. If we want to be part of that, we need to be more open. So this is the last slide, and I promised you I will come back to that. I think that's not the first time, and I think that's an interesting discussion we can have later on. But like, you know, I remember some 20 years ago, like, you know, visualization on small screens. The visualization community said, well, you know, why would you do that? There's no, like, you know, big screen where you can look at all your data. But the pitfall was that, like, we saw that as, like, you know, a competitor to like a big screen. But what it turned out to be is a new medium. Everyone is carrying around their phones now, and they have it in the pocket. So other people did this work, and it happened. Of course, you could say, well, you know, like, not everyone has a Powerwall at home, and maybe, like, you know, touch tables were also not that successful. But this is what we don't know. My claim, or my position is, like, AR is a potential disruptive technology in the future, and we're seeing a lot of, like, you know, things going toward this direction. People here in the physics department at the university, they work, for instance, at soft lenses, contact lenses that you can wear, not like, you know, these, like, you know, crappy hard things that you have on your eyes. If you have something like a form factor like that with, like, you know, photorealistic rendering, and, like, you know, enough computational power, then, like, you know, it's gonna be there, right? We don't know, and it's not gonna happen in 2 years, but, like, you know, in 20 or 30 years, these things might change the world. And my position is that we should be prepared, and we should build prototype and study technology and study, like, the designs with these prototypes in our community. Thank you very much. I stayed right in 7 minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. So our last presenter is Wesley Willett. Take it away, Wes.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Let me kick over into screen share here. Cool. So I'm Wesley Willett. I'm an associate professor at the University of Calgary. And I'll maybe kick a little bit back over into vision mode, and I think synthesize a bunch of ideas that are percolating throughout a number of the previous speakers' talks too. And so I think what the case that I want to make, and building on what some of the prior folks have said, is that situated visualization isn't just the future of viz research or viz practice, but that rather I think situated visualization is more, by and large, the future of computing more generally. I think in part, I'd argue that the history and the current state of viz and computing has mostly been defined by the limitations of the specific technologies and tool chains that we've been using. The fact that we've largely focused on non-situated visualizations on paper and on screen over the course of the last 30 years mostly reflects the fact that those are the kinds of tools we have to create visualizations, or at least have had. And it's not clear to me at all that the kind of big rectangles on desks or even visualization on 6-inch slabs of glass are some sort of natural apotheosis of how we're going to interact with computers in the future. So instead, I think I want to take this time to extrapolate forward a bit and posit that, one, in the next few decades, computers are going to become, and computing in general is going to become more immersive. It's going to become more invisible. And that wherever it appears, it's going to continue this ongoing trend that I think we've been seeing across most computing systems of becoming more visual and more spatial as it does. And I think as a result of that, once you have access to space and encodings and objects in that space as part of your canvas for computation and communication, that we're just going to see lots of applications take on that form. You can definitely see this if you look at our sort of pop culture visions of the future from the last couple of decades. So there's lots of examples of TV and movies that are full of AR visualizations, most of them extremely unrealistic ones. But it's still, I think, this idea of immersive computing displays that visually overlay and extend and gamify the world are really interesting. That includes particularly dystopian versions of them. So things like Kiichi Mitsuda's hyperreality, which is absolutely chock full of things that I would call situated visualizations, probably none of which are the things that we actually want to exist in another couple of decades. But like others said, I think we're also getting to a point where the vision of a lot of our contemporary technology companies that are building things in this space has this flavor too, right? So the XR platforms like the Vision Pro, like Snap's most recent Spectacles, like the Meta Orion demos, they're all really focusing on situated information displays as one of the big use cases. And as Michael alluded to, a lot of our visions within the community have had this flavor too. So when Petra and I and collaborators were thinking about this a couple of years ago, trying to look at superhero comics as inspiration for Viz, most of the future technologies that we are imagining are kind of augmented reality or spatial or situated. And most of my group's other design futuring examples that we've done in the last few years also tend to have this flavor, right? We're almost always leaning towards ideas that have information integrated visually into and around and on top of environments in ways that support some sort of existing tasks. And I think there's a bunch of interesting questions around the technologies we use to do this. Spatial AR and MR are probably the main new tool chain that we're mostly thinking about. I think, as Michael has said, we're probably not doing enough there. At the same time, I'm also, like other folks mentioned, not convinced that this is the only paradigm that we should be considering going forward. It's definitely true that spatial AR and MR are really hard, even from a technology angle, and we're probably not going to have kind of fully immersive rainbows end mixed reality for decades. At the same time, there are also lots of interesting social and interactive and experiential trade-offs whenever you start to create these kinds of systems, especially around the issues around shared visibility and how we interact with them and where they sort of live in our spaces that I think are challenging. And that makes me continue to be really excited about more low fidelity approaches. So approaches like autographic visualization strategies, which actually have a history going back much, much further than we might think. People have been using trace making techniques to reveal information in physical environments for a long, long time. If you talk to field biologists, for example, there's lots of just tools that exist in this space that arguably are situated visualizations. And I think that there are lots of untapped potential for small, cheap, lightweight displays using e-ink and other technologies as ways of bringing visualizations and input and output into spaces that we're not currently doing that in. We've created a bunch of examples in collaboration with Natalie that looked at this in the past. And I find this idea of kind of small display visualization in many new contexts one of the most compelling angles. I also think that the kinds of ambient projection mapping approaches, like the ones that you see in Brett Victor and Co.'s Dynamic Land experiments over the course of the last 10 years or so, highlight this as another really interesting technology stack and one that we should probably be exploring in greater detail. And then finally, I think, like, as one of the authors of one of the recent big collections of data physicalizations, I'd probably be remiss if I didn't point to the potential of physicalization approaches, which is a huge space, right? It's everything from physical craft to participatory installations to swarm robotics as other promising pathways for situated visualization that we should probably be exploring. All this makes me really excited about situated viz going forward. There's definitely some caveats. Obviously, there are big technical and social impediments to doing ubiquitous mixed reality, and we probably shouldn't limit our vision to just that. And I think there's also the risk that even if we can create some of these systems, it doesn't necessarily mean we should. You look at dystopian situated viz futures like hyperreality, there are lots of nice illustrations of how these tools could be socially disruptive in negative ways. And at the end of the day, we're gonna have to figure out how to balance attention. Anytime we have the ability to stick more information in front of someone and into the world, there are going to be costs with that. And that's something that we need to start to think even more than we already are about addressing. So with that in mind, I think for me, situated viz research is just really uniquely positioned to help address some of the challenges of spatial computing. And there are a bunch of cases where our low-hanging fruit, right? So things like understanding good visual encodings, understanding good interaction techniques for data and interfaces that are embedded in the world, new approaches to authoring those sorts of systems. These are all things that could pay really big dividends for the design of these kinds of situated computing systems more generally. So there's a lot of value in what we are talking about here beyond just our immediate viz community. At the same time, I think doing that in a broad way that doesn't focus myopically on a single technology is probably a better path forward than just branding this as kind of spatial AR or MR. And so really at the end of the day, I think it only takes a little bit of imagination for us to start to see the potential of situated information to impact almost everything we do. And there's no time like the present for us to start thinking about that broadly as a community. And yeah, happy to chat about this more with everyone.
Okay, thank you, Wes. So those were a wonderful set of panel presentations. Thank you all. We've already got some questions in Slido, which is great. Before we get into those, I want to follow up on this notion of a killer app. Nicholas said we don't have one yet. A number of others of you brought up the killer app. So what is the killer app for situated viz? And do we have it?
I wonder if you need to talk. Sorry, Nicholas, go ahead.
All I was going to say, I want to qualify this notion of killer app. I'm very curious to hear this answer as something that would be so good that everyone's going to get a Quest 3 or an Apple Vision Pro or a Meta Orion, something that really sells analytics in the real world.
I was going to say.
Sorry, go ahead, Petra.
I think this follows up well from Nicholas. I think the question is not necessarily what is the killer app for situated visualization, but what's the killer app for the situation or the technology. I mean, whatever the situation is, right? It could be the technology, it could be the data, it could be the people using it, etc. And yeah, I think this whole data analysis, or it doesn't even have to be analysis, right? It can be very quick information needs like we have on a smartwatch. I think that's mostly what they're being used for, except that we didn't really shape that practice of creating these visualizations early enough in our community. But things like that, I think will be really cool. And it's just really funny to see how when new technology comes out, it's often people put smiley faces on it or pictures, right? It reminds me of this picture sorting that happened on early tabletops the whole time. And I think we need to do more to just show that in this context. And there will be, but we need to publish some more visions, etc. about that.
Like for me, I think at the end of the day, the killer app that probably has the widest ranging appeal is personal informatics. I'm still pretty convinced by that, especially having built a whole bunch of personal informatics oriented situated viz tools that we have used personally. I think that at the end of the day, like that's one of the big things that is likely to get people to, especially in the sort of AR mixed reality space, the thing that's going to get kind of consumer adoption of these things. So it's, you know, digital name tags on people. It's the tracking, you know, when the last time was I did laundry, or how many times in a row I've flossed my teeth. Like I think it's, or it's sort of just counting in space, right? I think it's like little things that serve very immediate everyday information needs have the ability to potentially drive mass adoption of this. And maybe there's a place where really is a killer app that could affect everyone. There's lots of more technical use cases of this where people are doing tasks that are embedded in space that I think will have value going forward. But from a killer app perspective, for me, I think it's really when you can get to a point where you have these things that serve little everyday information needs that all of us have all the time.
I think Michael's next.
So good points, but I want to give a different angle here. I think the killer app is not having like ugly displays standing on our desks anymore. That's a much bigger thing, and it goes beyond the situated, and it goes more to like, you know, AR as a medium. And I think like, you know, if you think about it that way, then you can do like, you know, a lot of super interesting research, and you look into the future, what's going to happen. And I fully agree. We also need to improvise in how to test these ideas. Wes, I'm very much on board with like, you know, what you said. It might be a revolution for like, you know, human computer interaction, computing in general, how we interact with things. It gives up these constraints that we just have through the technology, and like, you know, head mounted AR could be one. By the way, you all mentioned that projected is not AR, which is simply not true, but we can talk about that later.
So let's follow up on technology then. There's a bunch of questions in Slido that relate to AR or AR versus non-AR situated visualizations. Let me see if I can summarize a few of them, and then we can have a bit of a tech discussion. So one of the questions is, most of the AR technology shown are neat, but not common or cheap. So what are more common or easily accessible AR options like mobile phones? Others are asking, do we need different terminology to talk about AR versus non-AR situated visualizations? And what are different design considerations for AR versus non-AR technologies for situated visualizations? Curious for your thoughts on AR versus non-AR.
I guess I can start because I was pushing very heavily for AR. So I already answered to one of the questions on Discord, which is yes, you can use your mobile phone to do AR. It's not going to be hands-free. AR is not head-mounted display. This is just like, it's one way to do it, but there's many different ways. There's like, projected, as we call it, augmented reality. And I think many people, if you go to ISMAR, they're totally open to have like, displays everywhere. It's not that different. They have like a much broader understanding of what they define as AR and then just like, head-mounted displays. And like we start in student projects, we very often start with like, just your cell phone, your smartphone, and use that as an AR device because it's very cheap. Like it doesn't have the benefits of like, doing something in parallel. Like if you want to repair a machine, it's sort of not really nice to hold your smartphone in parallel. So in terms of the terminology, I recommend also like reading the original papers on situated visualization and situated analytics, which have not been published in the Viz community, but I think people have already thought about. And I sort of like, I just want to warn that we like, we reinvent the wheel and we create our own technology. I think I'm also replying to another question is like, how can we get like, more papers into Viz? I think one way I sort of like, wanted to talk about it, but I didn't have time, so I not do it now. But like, let's team up with the people, right? Like, that's not the first time we do that in Viz. It's an interdisciplinary area, and it's a really exciting area where we can work together. And I know from many people in the AR community that are also very interested in working with Viz people. So.
Yeah, I think in some sense what I find interesting, actually, there was Natalie's paper made me think about that a lot a while ago, where I think she wrote about this interesting distinction between equipping the user or equipping the person versus equipping the environment. And maybe it's more ultimately a question about that, right? Who's being equipped rather than is it glasses or is it a projection or is it a small display? I think that's a really interesting and really important distinction because it has a lot of implications in terms of who has to be fed what kind of data, what privacy things do we have to consider, where are the sensors and what is the data sharing, etc.
Let me add one thing in terms of easily accessible technology. We have found that the Quest 3, the Meta Quest 3, which is, I think, only $500, it's not cheap, but it's certainly not $5,000 like the Vision Pro, or even 10 or even more like some of the older augmented reality devices, to be fairly accessible, right? So $500, you get pretty good video pass-through. It's a self-contained device, inside-out tracking, so you don't need anything. It's very mobile, and it runs a WebXR browser, so you can run a lot of these very advanced things, obviously Unity as well. So I think it is becoming much more approachable, much more accessible. Some of these technical barriers are being torn down. And like in many cases, Petra alluded to this too, the first application we see are mostly recreational, like games. But I think that we can do a lot of stuff as situated visualization and analytics researchers using the Quest 3.
Yes, I agree. We have also many of them.
I guess I would also
and we're not paid to make advertisement here. maybe just very quickly, but video see-through also makes your life easier in terms of like, messing around with the reality. That's also what you have on your cell phone, on your smartphone, right? You get the camera input, and an optical see-through with like a HoloLens 2, that's always hard because like, the environment is also always all the time interfering with like, what you're projecting on top of that. And like, doing things like diminished reality or X-ray vision is almost impossible. I'm not saying it's impossible, but like, it's really hard.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who also works a lot with like what one might describe as more casual uses of visualization, like using data in everyday life, also recently how to collect data through visualizations, like which we wrote a paper about, which we called input visualization. I mean, I never found AR that compelling for kind of the type of stuff that I was doing. I was been using small displays, and recently I've also found physicalization a really nice way of situating visualization. So I guess I might also be more on the low-tech side of things for situated visualizations for the types of stuff that I'm often doing, rather than going for like lots of data, highly analytical tasks. Because for me, situated visualization, as Wes mentioned, is for me really lends itself to these types of scenarios.
So do we need different
Just-
terminology for AR for AR versus non-AR situated visualizations? Is it helpful to break them in those categories?
I think I already answered that before, but I think there's different types of augmented reality. I think here I get the impression that it's a very narrow view of like what we mean with AR. It's broader than that. And I think like, reading up on like, the existing terms and using them, and then like, thinking about like, is this any different for visualization? Which I think there might be minor difference, so don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of that stuff is already done.
Any other takes on that one before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would probably agree that for me, it feels like this is a big space that probably all deserves to be considered together, especially because it's fluid space. I mean, you can very much imagine the exact same interfaces displayed on small physical screens in a real world environment and on display from a head-mounted device or projected on. In a lot of cases, the affordances of those are going to be exactly the same. And so it's not a question of the underlying technology that's used to do it for the most part. It's a question about what information you're showing and where you're showing it and how you're interacting with it. And so divvying the space up based off of the specific technical implementation to me doesn't seem particularly constructive. But there's also this trickiness of what language to use when we want to talk about the different technology categories. I think as an industry, there's lots of different terms that are being bandied around, including now sort of spatial computing instead of mixed reality or augmented reality or extended reality, all of which have been branded in ways that don't quite line up with the definitions that we have for them in the academic literature. And so for us, for the purposes of our conversations, we probably still need to actually make sure that we're being consistent with the terminology.
Okay, I want to shift gears a bit and go to the most upvoted question on Slido. Michael started to answer this, but I'm curious for others' perspectives to weigh in. How can we encourage and support more situated Viz and AR papers at the Viz conference?
Well, I mean, I think what Michael said for me, well, I don't have a good answer, but I think I've also had issue publishing situated visualization stuff at Viz, but I think coming from the completely other end of the spectrum, where it's more like qualitative research, more casual use cases, and might also be more low-tech type of research. So I just wanted to add that I think this type of stuff can also not be easy to publish at Viz, but yeah.
My experience, which, well, is slightly biased, of course, by my own work being in this area, but I still think that visualization community sometimes can be a little bit conservative when it comes to visualization techniques that go somehow beyond what we think of as a canonical, often desktop, personal computer, regular devices. As soon as it's touch displays, it took a while for touch displays to win traction in the visualization community, and I think it's similarly true for immersive technologies. We have had the immersive analytics wave, maybe, what is it now? Almost 10 years ago it started. So it has become more, I think, straightforward, and there are more examples to pick from, and there are a better educated reviewer pool. But I think in general, as visualization researchers tend to be somewhat conservative when it comes to technology platforms. I'm happy to hear someone dispute this, of course.
So I don't disagree, but I think we have not answered the question. We raised the problems, right? But we're not giving solutions. I think solution number one, that's what I said before, is teaming up with people. And solution number two, so I have to admit I'm prepared for that because, like, I wanted to include that in my talk. Solution number two, yes, there's a problem with, like, rejecting papers, but, like, hopefully many people listen, right? And that's exactly what I put in my talk. So don't expect that, like, these things in augmented reality specifically will be on par with, like, what you are used to from, like, normal just desktop visualization. So if the sun is shining in from the window, what do we do with a desktop visualization? Oh, we just close the curtains, right? Like, everything is fine. And environmental factors just don't play a role, right? In augmented reality and situated visualization more general, I think you always deal with the messy real world that's around. It's just not going to look as beautiful, and, like, we will have different tasks. So if we want to bring the papers in as reviewers and as also programming committee members, you need to sometimes push and you say, well, this is not as beautiful as we, like, are used to, but it's an innovative and it's an inspiring contribution. So let's push for it. Let's champion for these papers, right? And you don't have to do that for my papers. If you do, I will not be angry, of course. But I think in general we have to do it, and I've done it myself also for other people, not here so much successfully at Viz, but at Kai. And I think, like, that's also why we are seeing more papers of that sort at Kai, for instance, at the moment.
Yeah, okay, my answer, I have two answers to this. I think first, it still requires building a community. I think things like this panel are a really good thing. Workshops will be another, Dagstuhl seminars, things like that, so that we just have more people publishing or trying to publish these papers, obviously, right? And then the second problem is also a problem of framing. And I'm just going to briefly share a slide I also put in Discord earlier. What I found really interesting when reading a lot of the historical papers recently is that there's so many different terms that people use, right? To some extent, I think it's a question of framing, right? There's all of these different terms like spatially situated information spaces, information-rich virtual environments. They're situated with, obviously, ubiquitous analytics. And they're all somewhat related, but use different terminology. And I think ultimately, if we want to build later, right, some sort of common understanding, I have trouble, well, trying to avoid using the word theory, but let's say some common knowledge towards maybe a theory of situated visualization. We need to look at all of the stuff that people are publishing under all of these terms, and it will be really good if we joined or came to a common terminology. Do we know enough about how these things are all different? Maybe we should just use one term and then say how, apart from the core, what we're doing differs, etc. I don't have a very good solution. I think all of these papers describe situations where situated visualizations are a little bit special, right? So it's about analytics, for example. It's about being immersive. It's about being physical. It's about being embedded versus space, situated, etc. These are all really good points. There's a lot of different terminology, and maybe that also doesn't necessarily help to see a wave of papers emerge because the terminology is so different. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, are there any other thoughts on how Viz could change? Okay, great. I'm going to move on then to our next most upvoted question on Slido, which I think is really interesting. Fatima asks, what are your thoughts on the extended use of situated visualizations? Could it contribute to user fatigue, affecting engagement, overall effectiveness, and so on? Wes, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to this a little bit in my talk, but I think that this is a big potential issue. It's certainly when we sort of extrapolate out, when you ask students, like I do a design futuring class, and when you ask people to imagine the future of AR interfaces generally, almost always it is information overload. And it's pretty clear that this is a set of issues that we're grappling with already when we have access to information on phones and on smartwatches. So it's very clear that there is an attention monitoring issue here, and we need to be thinking when we're designing these tools about not only how do they sort of guide attention and how much information are they presenting, but also how are they going to stack on top of all of the other things that are being created and that people are probably going to be using at the same time. Because at the end of the day, we may not actually be the ones sort of dictating the entire stack. We may be adding it with each one of these new additional tools, adding additional sort of clutter and distraction and fatigue opportunities. So it seems like something we definitely need to be considering.
Nicholas, you're muted.
Sorry. I would echo what Wes said. Definitely, there's a lot of potential for dystopian futures. I mean, I think, for example, Dominikus Bauer, he has written a series of blog posts on, I think he called one of this is the like a hyper, very in your face ads everywhere, wherever you walk. But another view of that would be more, look at it from the other side. He calls it, I think he called it silent augmented reality, where you can embed data representations in the world so that they're almost, embedded, fully embedded. They're almost indistinguishable from your surrounding world. So I think there might be potential if we're careful about, taking care of people's attention budget and not overload them, but instead provide information in an opportunistic way where it's needed, rather than having a super cluttered dashboard or computer display where you have lots of information that you have to switch between. Maybe you could distribute some of those representations into the world around you so that, in fact, the information overload is decreased. And I'll give you a concrete example, which is not necessarily situated visualization, but from my own work with an Apple Vision Pro, I have found situations where I'll move the PDF viewer and put it by my sofa in a different part of the room. So that means when I go to read something using, I don't always do that, but sometimes when I try to force myself to use the Vision Pro, then just moving to a different place of the room that's quiet, I have no distractions. There's no web client that's pinging. There's no other Discord notifications. It's a way to build my physical environment to, in fact, make it easier for me to handle information. So I think that there's potential if we do this, correctly and thoughtfully.
So here's a question. I completely agree that there's a danger. The question is, to what degree should we worry about that now, and to what degree is this a problem for only situated visualizations, right? I can get information overload from a lot of different things like Discord or whatever. So Wes, in your, and this is a question for you, in your futuring class, when people bring up, oh, but this might be overload, whatever, will they stop being innovative? Right? Well, that would be my worry. Like, we stop coming up with creative solutions and then testing them to what extent they might be, but we might not even want to implement them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true, right? I think there almost certainly will be pushback to this generally. It's a bigger problem than just situated visualization. I think it's a problem that maybe is extremely salient for situated visualization because we're not just thinking about sort of displaying, video content or sort of a single stream of sort of chat or something. Often we're thinking about using this to display data sets that are huge data sets. And there's this temptation to say, well, like, actually, I have all of the space in a sort of infinite canvas around me. I could make infinitely many marks. And so I think the problem just becomes even more salient when you start to think about big data sets and the intuition that you can utilize that massive canvas in a way that maybe highlights some of the problems that are true for all systems of this flavor. So it's one that maybe we're more well positioned to solve because we're dealing with one of the limit cases of it.
I agree with that, but I think it would be still extremely interesting if somebody built the 10 million data point display that spins around me and does blinks and does whatever, so we can study it and see what happens to people, right? Before even just saying, "No, this will be too much. Let's just not try it out." I think there's some potential danger to stopping too early before you can actually study where things become too much and what the limits are, etc.
That brings me to one of the other.
It feels to me like we're in a unique position to push the limit, which is part of why maybe we should do that, but we should do it with an eye towards then how do we address the challenges that arise there. And I think the challenges that arise there are almost certainly going to include attention-oriented challenges.
Yeah, this kind of brings me to another question that I had for the panel, which is around prototyping these things. Building that millions of pixels display that surrounds me is not an easy thing to do, right? So what are the challenges in prototyping these kinds of situated visualizations, and how can we as researchers with limited resources overcome that?
So maybe I can start again. I think like it has gotten so much easier these days. And I think this point, I can't remember, but someone mentioned that already before. I think it was Nicholas. You have things like Unity at your hands, right? Like, where development is much easier. And also from a hardware perspective, like, now we just go and buy augmented reality head mounted displays. Like, some 15 years ago, you would need to build your own hardware, right? So I think I think that it's gonna be easier also with the newest generation of the Meta Quest 3 and everything, the hardware and like the software environments, they're getting easier, and they're foster prototyping. I think there are still challenges, right? And that's why I think we need to become active, right? Like, how do you put like 1 billion points in such an environment? That's challenging, right? Like maybe we combine it with some progressive analytics, also great topic, by the way, but not of interest here right now. And then like, we need to push the limits, and we need to like, make technical contributions that like, also bring our interests into this area. That's my point, exactly my point of like, I think we need to become active. Otherwise, like, other people will do that work for us. Or not.
Maybe Petra was next.
Yeah, I just was going to say we have this problem a lot, especially when we're trying to create situated visualizations for novel technology that doesn't yet exist or exists in a way that we know it will happen. But for example, we had a project about a wrist-worn display, right? Smartwatches are limited to this one place on your wrist, but what if you could display information around your entire wrist? We're not far away from that, but any prototype that we can build will have to be tethered in some way. It will be cumbersome. You can't do it really tests with people wearing them in their everyday life. That's hard. That makes it really, really difficult. And what we're doing a lot is just ideation exercises, paper prototyping, and yeah, these sort of in situ methods where you can have people sketch and outline ideas.
I would add to this. I would echo what Michael said, that yes, there are augmented reality toolkits that could provide a starting point. Unity is one of them. Unreal is another. The challenge with these, in my opinion, is that, and this is a whole can of worms, I'm not going to go into super long detail about them, but to use some of these environments, you basically need to be a 3D game engine developer. And yeah, there have been some toolkits that have been designed for this, but it's certainly outside the skills of most visualization research, typical skills that we have. And we have a paper on focused more on WebXR as an enabling technology rather than Unity or Unreal, because WebXR is an open standard, just like 10, 15 years ago when we switched from Flash and native apps to web-based visualizations. My point is that we should be using WebXR as a toolkit for this. And in my group and in my research center, we're working on creating these toolkits that will make it possible for people who don't have a lot of this background to build 3D situated visualizations, ubiquitous analytics, immersive analytics experiences using some of the same technologies like Vega Lite or D3 or similar technologies for immersive and situated analytics. So hopefully we get to present these soon at Viz or a related venue.
I guess the one other technical gap that I'll highlight is that I think a lot of the most interesting situated visualization applications are cases where the data is sort of coming from your environment. And we don't have a lot of great examples of technical stacks that allow us to quickly close the loop there. So if I have a whole bunch of sensors in an environment or a whole bunch of cameras in the environment, and my data sources are sort of diverse and distributed there, we don't really have lots of off-the-shelf tools that allow us to really quickly aggregate all of that information, spatially register it, and connect it to something like Unreal or Unity. And filling that gap to me feels like it's a pretty important one if we want to enable a really broad space of visualizations that are connected to sensing and input in the environment. For me, one of the reasons that it's really interesting for us to consider more low-tech solutions is that a lot of those problems we can solve in at least some ways in really low fidelity, with really low fidelity methods. And so it's worth exploring there too. But I think that solving that piece and providing better ways of integrating sensors with the actual visualization pipeline is something that we should be thinking about.
All right, we are nearing the end
sorry,
of this session.
very clicky, Melanie. We have actually a toolkit that's called RegRug. If you want to build it, it's probably not the easiest, but it's exactly meant for prototyping situated visualizations with augmented reality. Melanie, sorry.
Nice. Yeah, so on that note, we are nearing the end of the session. I want to thank all of our speakers for wonderful presentations and a wonderful discussion. And I want to turn it over to Michelle for a final wrap up.
Thanks, Melanie. Thank you to all the panelists. That was fantastic. And we will keep the discussion going in Discord for a bit. And panelists, please do put links to all these tools. Because I'm like, I want to go make an easy situated viz. So please do put that in there. So some of the key themes and takeaways that we were covering in this discussion as we were doing some note taking is this is an underexplored space in visualization. And there is lots of room, all you PhD students, watching this, there's a lot of room for research and novel contributions. And as a community, sort of the sentiment, we don't want to miss this opportunity. We want to be part of this new technology, and we don't want to repeat past situations where we miss the boat. We want to keep it going. Also, that we need AR, and that using AR technology, very broad definition of what AR is necessary and needed to do more of this work. And that our community, as you have new tech and new design paradigms, we could benefit. I know Petra didn't want to say the word theory, but we could benefit from some theory and recommendations and some better terminology to define these different spaces. And finally, I think there is a call, and I'm thrilled everyone who's on the panel was able to participate today, and everyone who's been watching online and participating in Discord, that there is a sort of desire to build this community and viz. So we hope everyone will keep the momentum going. So here one more time, and we'll repost it in Discord, is the link to the website for our panel. But, if you're watching, you can reach out as organizers. We're going to try and keep the ball going, maybe get some future workshops going and events at Viz or Chi or other seminars. So please do stay in touch. And with that, we can conclude. I believe the video is live for at least another 5 minutes or so, and the Discord will also, remain here. And thanks everyone for being a part of this today.
Thanks so much for organizing
Thank
it.
you. Thanks, Michelle and Melanie.
Thank
It
you.
was fun.
Great discussion, everybody. Great.
I have to keep sparring with Michael.
Yeah. Will you be also in the last panel today? I will be there. No,
No.
I'm kidding.
I am done. I'm done.
Me too.
My pizza is delivered in 15 minutes.
Oh, lucky you. I'm really
Yeah.
I'll
jealous.
be over in that last panel.
You're the-
I'll see you there, Michael.
No, I will say this is that moment where I'm like, if we were in person, I was gonna say, let's go get coffee. And anyone want to get dinner tonight? And like, let's keep chatting. And I want to hear your. Great, we can't do any of that. So we will
Mhm.
have to communicate offline and be like, how can we get together and keep talking about this? And I want to hear more.
There's always next year. There's always Vienna.
There's always Dagstuhl.
Yes.
Yeah, that too.
Melanie and I were thinking of that, so we can send an email thread. But if people think this is cool and would be a good dog stool, we could certainly consider that. Find a way to get together.
I think it would be a good idea because you can bring the communities together. That's definitely something that Dagstuhl is good
Yes.
Yeah. And like you said, like there's this overlap, this little Venn diagram of all the different communities that are relevant. So getting key
Mhm.
stakeholders all in one place to chat and discuss this could be really beneficial. So something to think about. But if you think
for.
of
That
anything,
worked also well for the immersive analytics. I haven't been there, but like it really, got some pace after the Dagstuhl. I think some of you have been there, right? Wes, Petra, I think Melanie. I don't
I
know.
was
who
there.
was.
Yeah.
I was too young back in the days.
No.
Hey, even Zoom shows the gray beard.
Oh, that's the white background, man.
Ah, okay.
The reflection.
All right.
well, thanks again, everybody. And there's the virtual hallways, and take a break for those who are in the next panel. We'll see you there.
Michelle, we
Yeah.
need one more last
Right.
joke from you.
You want?
Say.
Oh, have you heard the latest statistics joke? Probably.
Nice.
I actually, it was funny, in preparation for an in-person panel, I have like 20 of these jokes, most of them memorized, because I was like, fill in a dull moment. So I got them.
That
That's
should
a
become a
perfect way
thing.
to end. Thank you,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Okay.
All right, I'm off to my pizza. See ya.
Bye.
All right.
Have a good
Bye,
time.
everybody.
Bon appetit.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.